Welcome to section 8.2, Use Properties of Parallelograms Notes. The objective in this video is to calculate missing sides and angle measures using properties of parallelograms. First off, definition. A parallelogram is a quadrilateral, which means four sides, with opposite sides that are parallel. Okay, so if I was to draw a quadrilateral, that is also a parallelogram. I know it has four sides and opposite sides are parallel. Those are little arrows. I'm going to do two on the sides to show that it's the right and left side. Now, a cool thing about a parallelogram is that the opposite sides are going to be congruent and your opposite angles will also be congruent. So if I went in this diagram, this side in these sides in these sides would be congruent and they're parallel. These two sides would be congruent and parallel. This angle with the top right angle are congruent, and this top left and bottom right are congruent as well. Cool fact to note, definitely when we're calculating values like in example 1. So looking at here, this is a quadrilateral that's also a parallelogram because opposite sides are parallel. That means then opposite sides are congruent. So x plus 4 would equal 12. So if I set it up, that means x would be 8. And it also means opposite angles are congruent. So angle y, opposite of it is 65. So that's an easy one. Y would equal 65. Okay, moving on to the next one. Sometimes it gets a little more complicated. We're going to now calculate the values of x and y in the figure below. Use this to then, in the end, find the measure of angle A and angle B. Assume ABCD is a parallelogram. So when I'm told that, I'm right away going to put my parallel markings. And then I know all the opposite sides are congruent and that opposite angles are congruent. So first equation I can write is that angle B equals angle D. So angle B equals angle D, which means 6y equals 6x plus 6. I also know that these are opposite angles and they're congruent. So angle A would equal angle C, which means 10x minus 2 would equal 11y minus 24. Now, to solve this, notice there are two variables and two equations. So as you can guess it, we are going to use systems of equations, either elimination or substitution. I'm going to choose to do substitution because all I have to do is divide by 6. Divide by 6 to get y by itself. And then I'm going to substitute this in to the other equation and now solve. If you need a little review on that, that's okay. We'll do it together. Otherwise, keep going. Let's check your answer at the very end. So you would have 10x minus 2 equals 11. In parentheses, x plus 1. I'm substituting that value in. Need to distribute my 11. You'll get 11x plus 11 minus 24. Combine your like terms. You'll get 11x minus 13. Bring all your x's to one side, all your numbers to the other side. Show me those steps. You should get x equals 11. When you get that, now you're going to substitute it back in to find y. So y would equal 11 plus 1. Y equals 12. Now that's great. That's x and y. The question, though, asks, find the measure of angle A and angle B. Okay, well, angle A is 10x minus 2, which is now 10 times 11 minus 2. So angle A equals 108 degrees. Let's do the same thing for angle B. That equals 6y. Well, y we found is 12. So angle B actually equals 72 degrees. Okay. Now, one interesting fact about these two numbers. Do you notice angle A and angle B? When you add them together, you will get 180 degrees. That is a good thing to check. Why do they add up to 180 degrees? Well, they are the consecutive angles. Think back to that chapter where we talked about consecutive interior angles. Look at here, I'm trying to make them a little darker. That's why they add up to 180. That's a perfect way to check your work. So look at that as we move forward to the next problem. So as we keep going, another property, in a parallelogram, the consecutive angles are, very exciting, supplementary, like I just said. And we know that's true because they're consecutive interior angles of two parallel lines. Now another definition coming at you, diagonals. A diagonal is a segment connecting non-adjacent, I'll explain what that means, vertices. A property of a diagonal is that in a parallelogram, the diagonals will bisect each other, which means cut in half. Let me draw you a picture to show what I mean. So here is any shape. I'm just going to do a rectangle, it turns out to be. The diagonal connects non-adjacent vertices. So that is a diagonal. And you also have from the top right to the bottom left. That's a diagonal. The cool fact is that they bisect each other, which means this segment is congruent to this one, and this segment is congruent to that one, because they both are bisected. Which is interesting, because this point in the middle then, hopefully you notice, would be that midpoint. It cuts both segments in half, which gets to the middle. You're going to use that fact as we go to the next example. Diagonals of the quadrilateral LMNO intersect at point P. What are the coordinates of point P? Well, point P is that green point in my diagram, so it's the midpoint. I can choose now which values I want to use. Well, this point here, O, is 0, 0. N is the point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 0. M is 7, 4. And L is 1, 4. Because it's diagonal, we know this is congruent to this, and these two segments are congruent as well. So I can find now the midpoint of either of those lines. It won't matter. So how about I just do, how about LN? I'm just going to look at this one. No reason why I picked it. I just chose to. So LN, I want to find now the midpoint of LN. Well, let's review our midpoint. It's x1 plus x2 divided by 2. y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So using our coordinate points, be 1 plus 6 divided by 2. 4 plus 0 divided by 2. So get 7 over 2 and 4 over 2, still simplifying. You get 7 over 2 as your x and 2 for your y. So that is point A. Again, it was finding this green point, which is the midpoint. Okay. Example 4. The measure of one interior angle of a parallelogram is 0.25 times the measure of another angle. Find the measures of each angle. My first idea, draw a picture. So it is a parallelogram which means it has 4 sides. Opposite sides are parallel. Opposite sides are congruent, and opposite angles are congruent. That's important to know because this angle has to be the same as the top right, and this top left has to be the same as the bottom right. So you are given that the measure of one interior angle is 0.25 times the measure of another. Well, let's call this one x, and that means this one has to be x as well. 0.25 times that, 0.25x. 0.25x. Notice opposite angles are still congruent, and you're good to keep going. Now, take a moment, find the measure of each angle. Hopefully you had enough time. There's 2 ways to do this problem. The way that I'm going to look at it is the fact that these angles are consecutive interior. What do I know about consecutive interior? Well, they sum to 180 degrees. So I can write x plus 0.25x would equal 180 degrees. That's one way to do it. So you'll get 1.25x equals 180, which means each angle is 144. Well, that's what x equals. That's what x equals. So when you try to find the measures of the angle, well, x would equal 144. The 0.25x, that angle, would actually equal 36 degrees if I plug in 0.25 times my 144. So these are my 2 angle measures, and I'm good to go. Kind of write it like that. Example 5. In the diagram, QRST and STUV are parallelograms. Find the values of x and y. Explain your reasoning. Okay, multiple ways to look at this. When I see it's a parallelogram, I know that these sides are parallel and they're also congruent. That's just in the first parallelogram. This red one right here. Oops, sorry about that. This red one. So I know that this measure is 20. Well, if I look at that one now compared to this blue parallelogram, again it's parallel, so opposite sides are congruent, so this would be 20. It's again looking at what I'm given. What I just mentioned is the fact that QR, that segment, is equal to TS because they're opposite sides, but it is also equal to UV because that's opposite sides of a parallelogram. So QR was 20, means TS is 20, means UV is 20, which tells me X is 20. Reasoning behind it, opposite sides. This is how I write parallelogram. I do my parallel lines. You can do that. Are congruent. So that was using the opposite sides are congruent. Let's look at those opposite angles now. Well, I'm not really given any opposite angles. I'm given, though, these two, which are consecutive interior on my blue parallelogram. So writing my blue parallelogram, so I can do the fact that 40 plus y plus 80 would equal 180 because they're consecutive interior. So y plus 120 equals 180. Y would equal 60 degrees. Again, my reasoning, those consecutive interior angles are supplementary. In a parallelogram, make sure you always add in that parallelogram. That's where we're able to use these facts. Okay, almost done. You're doing great. As we move on to the next page, there's a few more examples. I want you to try all these examples. I can set up a couple with you, but but I want you to do 6, 7, 8, 9 for tomorrow. That will give us a good idea of what you struggle on in the video. I'll start the first one off with you. Looking at it, calculate the measures of the missing angles. Well, already we know it's a parallelogram. So this angle is going to be the same as this one. So angle C is 64 degrees because of opposite angles are congruent. We also know that angle A and angle D are consecutive interior, which means angle A plus angle D would equal 180 degrees. Plug in what you know. Solve. Look at angle D is 116 degrees. So I'm going to put that in here. Well, that is now an opposite angle to angle B. So that means angle B 116 degrees as well. Please make sure when you're saying your answers that you write them all out. So angle C equals 64 degrees. Don't just leave them in the diagram. It's very hard for us to read. So write out those are all your missing angles. Okay. This next one, again, you're going to use the fact that it's a parallelogram. So opposite sides are congruent, opposite angles are congruent, and that consecutive interior sum to 180. So take this, set equal to that. Use the fact that these are consecutive interior, which means that they sum to 180. Okay, so set up two equations and solve for F and for G. So you'll have an F equals and a G equals in the end. Number 8 is very similar to what number did we just do? It'd be very similar to number 4, so if you need help, use example 4. We want to see what you can do. And then number 9, give it your best shot. We want to see what you can do with vertical angles, consecutive interior, and I'm telling you that this is a parallelogram. So I'm telling you this fact. Use that to your benefit. Use the sum of a triangle, which you know from the last video is 180 degrees, and good luck with that. We will check in all 4 of these examples tomorrow. If you have questions, please bring them to class. Have a good one.